Good afternoon. We're here today with Dr. Michael Seils and Dr. Melissa Lazinski. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for having us.
of course. Thank you for being here. Your position paper, Leveraging Retrieval-Augmented Generation, Technology for Enhanced Accreditation Preparedness and Compliance in Physical Therapy Education, addresses an issue that regularly keeps DPT program administrators up at night, and that's the sheer mountain of documentation required for CAPD. Anybody who's gone through accreditation has known that that's a lot of work. Really just to start our conversation, how did you first start thinking about this paper and how AI could be related to accreditation, how it could be helpful?
Absolutely. When I think of this, as everything's kind of going on, everyone's thinking about how can I use artificial intelligence or AI to streamline efficiencies, processes, things like that. So ultimately, last year, myself and Michael Brown at the University of Buffalo with me, we're really starting to strategize. How can we have accreditation coming up in a few years. We have all of these different documents kept in different formats, different techniques, etc. And we're basically we went on the AI rabbit hole, taking courses, looking at every program from Claude, OpenAI, Gemini, and essentially we're trying to find a way that we could actually have an AI expert of our program. So from our handbook to our policies, our procedures, our curricular map, and I tried everything. I even tried custom GPTs, uploading documents, so into these large language models, and the challenge kept coming: hallucinations, plausible but factually incorrect output. So essentially, it was making up faculty members or policies or items on our syllabi. So I really got frustrated, and I was like, I know we can do this. I just didn't know how. And I ended up reaching out to one of my colleagues, Ryan Rich, who is an AI entrepreneur, chief technology officer, and he said, using a standard LLM, even with the best prompt in the world and adding restraints and things like that, you're still going to be at risk for hallucinations. You need to look into retrieval augmented generation. And for me, ultimately, that was a light bulb moment because I've never heard of retrieval augmented generation, which I'll refer to as RAG. And essentially, he kind of pointed me in the direction of retrieval augmented generation as a way to use LLMs, but actually have the responses based on your sources. So traceable citations to every response. And once we started doing that at University of Buffalo, I reached out to my colleague, Doug Holliday, who I'm on a ACAPT EPIC committee with, and I basically said, "Hey, we're going through accreditation. We're doing some innovative things. I think this might be helpful for you." And she looped me in with Melissa, and we did one Zoom meeting. And Melissa, you can kind of share from there, kind of that Zoom meeting, and then what kind of occurred.
I had already been tinkering with AI and starting to just be in the planning phase of our upcoming reaccreditation. And I was using Copilot because we have an institutional license. So I was using that to really proofread and, help wordsmith some things, look at word counts, but really limited functionality. I wasn't aware at all of what RAG was or anything like that. So we had our first meeting as a group, and Michael introduced this technology through Google, and I had never seen that before, but very quickly he gave a demo of what it could do. And so we got off that call and I immediately started again experimenting, of course, with things that were non-confidential, non-proprietary, but going in things that are public documents and trying to use it and see how it could work. And then it just blew my mind. And I was all in on how I could use this type of technology to help with the beast that is accreditation.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we just recently went through accreditation. I would just even say a couple of years ago, and I'm still having flashbacks of how much work that is. And specifically, let's look at that baseline problem. What, from a primary administrative bottleneck or human error risk in our traditional manual methods, in compiling a self-study are really the huge barriers?
Yeah, I think from a accreditation perspective, I mean, we obviously want continuous quality improvement. We're updating documents, and I think there's always updates and changes. So you have faculty members with expertise, the CAPI standards change. So I think ultimately the quantity of documents from multiple sources and from multiple individuals. So one program alone may have 15 to 20 syllabi. It has the new CAPI standards. Is every document up to date? Is our curriculum map up to date? We've made curricular changes throughout time. Is everything accurate and up to date? So I would say the quantity of information, the amount of time bringing all, how can we be efficient with how do we have every individual review every syllabi and ensure that their syllabi is accurate and up to date? So I think the quantity of information, and there's naturally going to be human error. If you hand me a 50-page policy and procedure manual, I may miss something versus having a specific committee or using a tool to kind of streamline that. So I would say quantity.
Excellent. Many faculty members have experimented with public AIs, ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, but your paper gives a strong warning about relying solely on those standard LLMs, those large language models, for DPT accreditation due to those hallucinations. But for an educator who might not have a computer science background, how would you describe the difference between asking a standard LLM to draft an accreditation narrative versus using RAG system grounded in a program's private knowledge base?
So, I mean, really, it's in the structure of how these two tools work. If I ask just a regular LLM a question about my accreditation documents, or I'm having it do some sort of organizational or analysis task, it's going to bounce what I'm asking it off of the entire internet. Right or wrong, good or bad, PT accreditation standards or dental school accreditation standards, right? It's going to find whatever it can find versus if I give it the two or three source or more source documents I want it to refer to in order to answer my question, I'm going to get a much more focused and accurate answer as I'm digging through and I'm trying to do these types of analyses or whatever operation I'm trying. Essentially, it's narrowing down the information base that it's pulling from so that I'm sure and I'm controlling that it's asking the right questions of the right information source, basically.
Absolutely. And so, how does this three-part architecture of RAG, the retriever, generator, separate index, mitigate those specific blind spots?
Yeah, so in the paper, there's a really nice figure that Michael Brown made. I think it's a really nice to reference, but essentially you have to think about you have a query. So what am I asking, right, into this RAG, okay? And you are going to have the knowledge base, which is source documents. So from my perspective, in my curricular group, I'm going to have every syllabi, I'm going to have all the CAPT standards, maybe our Bloom's taxonomy documents, etc. So now I'm going to send a query. So I'm going to send a question. The retriever is going to go specifically, instead of going to the internet, right, and going to Wikipedia and all these unreliable sources, it goes to my knowledge base. So it is now scanning and looking at all my knowledge base to predict the response, but based on my knowledge base. And then the generator is what then gives me that response. So what I like about it is that I'm essentially typing, I have a goal. I have documents in there. Now it's going to search my documents to achieve that goal and give me a response. And the best part is the response comes with a traceable citation. So I get a response of where there's a discrepancy in my syllabi, and then I have a traceable citation. So now it is critical that we have the human oversight. I'm checking that citation. It's going to take me to that syllabi or to that document to show me where it got that response versus the LLM going to the internet and it may create a citation. There's been examples of court cases citing cases that don't exist or creating citations. This will actually take you and give you a traceable citation to your knowledge base, which is only what you uploaded.
I think a way to think about it too, if you're not familiar with it, is if the search function on a Word document or a PDF. Well, instead of just having one document, I can have a group of documents. And instead of trying to figure out a keyword that I'm looking for as I'm filtering through, I can just ask the question, where are all of my policies related to student grievances? And it can search through everything I have and it can give me all of them. I actually used it to do this with my handbooks to make sure my handbook was in alignment with our college's handbook and make sure there were no discrepancies between the two. And that's essentially what I did. I gave it both handbooks and I said, please find any discrepancies, misalignments, problem areas, and tell me where they are. And so I had a really targeted report after that.
I mean, that's really, really an incredible way of using this. And that point of triangulation of data, right? That here are all these different sources, here's the surveys, here's the handbooks, as you were saying. How does that triangulation process, when you're talking about it with your whole faculty, you know, how does this help with quality improvement during your annual retreat or any just conversations that you're having about accreditation?
I can share from personal experience because I've been outcomes reporting for most of my career in academia, and it's a pretty painstaking process of looking at all the various surveys, our practice exam results, comp exam results, our NPTE results, pieces of information we gather qualitatively from different advisory boards and things like that. And then the human brain looking at all of that and figuring out the patterns and the connections versus taking all those source materials and then asking specific pointed questions about themes, about content areas, about strengths and weaknesses. And again, having it traceable back to where the answer was retrieved from so that I can, if the answer even doesn't quite make sense to me, I can trace right down to it, find out what exactly we were looking at to come up with that particular response. So the amount of time that you can save. One other example is taking student comments, right? You could have dozens and dozens over multiple surveys and doing thematic analysis in a really quick and much more intuitive way conversationally versus going through line by line and coding and then using some sort of program to help with that. So you can get a very fast synthesis of information. Of course, you always have to double check it, but it's a much more easy access type and intuitive process to use these technologies for that type of triangulation.
I think that's a really good point too about, just speeding things up. And we do talk about prompting though, and you talk about prompting in your article as well. How important is that prompt that you give this LLM as you're going through everything?
I think Michael would agree it's essential.
Yeah, absolutely could not agree more. Garbage in, garbage out. So if you have a terrible prompt, you're going to get a terrible response. The more specific that prompt is, the more the specific your answer is going to be. And same thing with the source documents. If you have just a bunch of documents in there that don't really aren't organized, things like that, you're not going to get the response. Melissa can speak really well on this because she actually kind of created the table of going through different types of prompts, and we don't need to be a prompt engineer by any means. I want to emphasize we have no coding background, no computer science background. Just knowing the basics of a prompt to get a response, and then some examples, and I'll have Melissa kind of share that, and then we can go through some other examples.
The prompting, you have to speak or prompt as if you're talking to someone who has no idea what you're talking about. So you have to be very specific and very clear about what it is you want and also what you don't want, giving examples of what the output should look like, or, using your actual source data and saying from this data you could determine XYZ, giving it an example of what it's looking for and what kind of format it should be in and that type of thing. That's all really important. The other thing about prompting is you can do it in stages. If you think about a big picture question and then refine your questions or your prompts down further and further to get more specific. So there's lots of different ways to go about it. The more you do this and practice with this, with trying to get more complicated functions accomplished, the easier it gets and the more you get into the mode of quote, so to speak, talking with the AI. But there's several approaches to doing this. I would say with the take-home messages, with anything that's complicated, breaking it down into steps is the best way to start. And I think too, if you're a novice, breaking things down into pieces and seeing what kind of response you get from your prompts, you can learn a lot about how to say things or how not to say things. And then the other thing I would say that people kind of lose track of is telling it what you don't want is a really helpful thing too, so that it's not making assumptions about what you're asking or bringing in information that's superfluous to what it is you're trying to get at.
The paper goes through like one shots, like different methods, and a lot of accreditation is going to be that chain of thought that more complicated. So, for example, our student handbook says attendance is mandatory. The university says it is optional, or a different word. This is a discrepancy. Now identify 5 other discrepancies in our student handbook. So this gives it a very explicit an example that is present, and now you're asking to check. It's basically it's quality assurance. It's checking each thing to see if there's any discrepancies, and then you can always, a lot of these programs do it automatically, but with traceable citations. So now I know that everything that I get, I can actually double check that before I move forward with my next item. And I think just to add, it's always great to do a test prompt. You may think you have this great prompt and it goes down a different route. Pump the brakes. Let me readjust that prompt to make it better to then get the outcome I want. So I think it's always great to do a test prompt before you really dive much deeper.
I mean, these are great take home messages, especially that idea of this is what I don't want.
Yeah.
It is something that we tend to gloss over, just like you said. And then the other part to this are the inputs. And you talked about this a little bit in the paper as well, is that the inputs need to be AI ready. What are you talking about with AI ready, and how can we do this in a low tech way or in a way that is the easiest for the AI to read and interpret?
So the great thing is, in general, I mean, and then they say like the AI you're using right now is the worst AI you're ever going to use. So by the time somebody actually listens to this or hears this down the road, there's going to be advances and changes. So what I would say is a lot of documents are already AI ready. When we say AI ready, it's machine readable. So that machine is putting it into an LLM and it's essentially text readable to then create the response. Where things get challenging are sometimes images, handwritten notes, for example, complex tables or PDFs, for example. It may read it just like a PDF, like it's reading a photo. So
Mhm.
in general, a lot of these programs that we use, Google Notebook, Microsoft Copilot Notebook, things like that, they're fairly good at being able to look at it. However, if you have a complex table, right, and that table goes from page 1 to 2, it may think that page 2 is a different page, right? So now my data is cut between page 1 and 2. Or if this table looks complicated that a program director and faculty are reading it, realistically, can this program read it? So essentially, when you think of machine readable and AI ready and handwritten notes, right, it's going to be better if it's text. So there are programs such as Mark It Down, where it actually will convert a file that's not machine readable into machine readable. Or how can I make this complex table into smaller tables? So essentially, you want your documents to be as machine readable already. And in all honesty, if you have syllabi and you're looking at survey results and handbooks, things like that, it's probably good to go. However, if you have graphics, images, handwritten files, you're gonna have to be mindful because when you put that in, it may not be reading it correctly. So I think that's really the big take home for that.
I mean, that's a fantastic point. The other point to this too is security, right? And that about FERPA and HIPAA. When a program director is trying to choose between a closed system versus open system, and we talked about that a little bit at the beginning, what are the critical data privacy trade-offs that they need to negotiate with the university's IT administration?
So regarding closed system, when you think of the heavy hitter programs of LLM, so these programs are typically closed. So GPT, Gemini, Claude, Anthropic. When it says closed system, what that means is that the data that it's training its model on is confidential, right? We know it's scraping the internet, it's looking at all these different areas, but it's really closed. It's not fully transparent. We know that it has all this information. An open system is, hey, I can actually look at the trainable data. What is this model trained on? So in general, a standard user with no technical expertise, we're all using closed systems. We're using ChatGPT, Gemini, things like that. However, we need to be mindful of what are we putting into the system. And ultimately, you need to be looking at FERPA, HIPAA, and what are your university policies, right? Your university is probably going to be Google or Microsoft, and they're going to be encouraging you to use a platform because they have some type of agreement that what you upload by using this corporate account is secure. So I think that ultimately, before diving down this rabbit hole, if you're ultimately you want to make sure that, hey, am I using a program? And the great thing is all of these different items have their own version. Microsoft Copilot has a notebooks feature that is a RAG. Google Notebook LM is a RAG for Google. Claude Projects is a RAG for Claude. So it's finding what can I use, and then ultimately what are we comfortable putting in there. I can tell you that I have not put any student facing data into my RAG. Anything with student information, things like that, no patient information. Mine is all de-identified. It's syllabi, it's outcomes, it's de-identified because now I can go through that. However, if you were using a specific closed program that you had the ability to do that, then you could put more student-facing data. But I think ultimately it's like this is a tool to help you with accreditation. You do not want to have an ethical nightmare where you're plugging your entire program's information into a system that was not secure. So you really, really need to follow suit. We've connected with our IT folks, and I know Melissa and our universities are Microsoft, but we use Google. But for Google, we just don't use anything student-facing or things like that.
The other thing, even aside from FERPA and HIPAA, just thinking about confidential information, like for example, your exams. Do you want to put that out into a platform that then might be feeding other AI users out in the world right now? All your test questions are somewhere out there in the ether. We don't know where. So it's even not things that are like federally protected, things you just need to keep private from a program perspective as well. So I think sometimes people forget about that and they're putting things out there that they wouldn't, if you wouldn't share it with your students, shouldn't put it on the AI either.
It's a fantastic take home message there. And I think all of these are really good points and I could see how people could get really excited about using a RAG to help. And you conclude that with a strong reminder that AI is an assistant, not a replacement, and that human oversight remains, the ultimate quality assurance metric. And so, as a final thought for a DPT program looking to pilot the RAG system, what's the very first step or low-hanging fruit that they could take as a first step?
Yeah, I think what I started with was pretty simple, doing my handbook reconciliation process. I had two documents. I roughly knew where they were, where things were. They were organized similarly already, and I was able to just put them both in and start asking questions so that I could double check and make sure I was aligned and make edits as needed. So something that's more contained, where maybe it's one or two documents and you're asking for sort of simple one-step types of prompts. Read this and tell me where this piece of information is, or read these two documents and tell me wherever there are differences. And then it's not a multi-step type of process, because every piece of information additional that you add into the mix and every additional step you add to your prompt, you're introducing more and more possibilities to get off track with what your response is going to be. So that's my advice, is start small and simple.
I would echo all of Melissa's sentiments. I think ultimately you have to check to make sure, hey, this program is appropriate that I can use this and what documents can I put in there. But starting simple with, I'm a course coordinator of these three courses. Okay. I'm going to put these three syllabi into my notebook and I'm going to put the CAPTE standards and I'm going to ask it to identify consistency with my syllabi core standards and CAPTE standards to identify if there's any errors. I may plug in Bloom's taxonomy and say, my goal is that this course is at an introductory level. Can you please assess these learning objectives to ensure that they're at the introductory level using Bloom's taxonomy? So starting with something manageable, each person manages so many courses. Let's make sure that my syllabi is accurate and up to date. And then the next level is as we train more faculty, then they're able to do the same thing with their syllabi. That's kind of where we started. We learned how to use it, and then we ultimately wanted to make sure that is everyone's syllabi is accurate. We can't make a curricular map until our syllabi is accurate. Once everybody's syllabi is accurate, we're using the same terminology, the same taxonomy, then we can have it do a more advanced step of actually creating a curricular map with traceable citations. But starting with what you can control your courses. You could upload your PowerPoints, and you could upload this and ensure that is this actually assessing what I said it was going to assess? Is this too advanced for Bloom's taxonomy? So I think starting very small, but policies and procedures is a great way. Your university is going to have policies and procedures. You're going to have a handbook. Comparing those to make sure that they're aligning.
I mean, this is really a really fun, and I'm going to say this in a nerdy way. I'm thoroughly excited about this. You gave us so many good take-home messages. The article itself has so many good resources, from the figures to the prompts, and I really suggest that anybody who's interested in this, anybody who wants some efficiency, to really read this article. And so, thank you again for coming on and talking with us and giving us kind of a roadmap of where to go with all of this. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much, Derek and JOPT, just for giving us the platform and opportunity to publish this paper. Ultimately, when we found this mechanism, we couldn't find any research covering this topic. So our number one goal was, how can we disseminate this to help every program in the country? And whether that program is going to embrace it slightly or they're going to go advanced, things like that, we just wanted folks to feel informed that they had platform resources to help their programs. The goal of accreditation is continuous quality improvement. if we can if these programs can help the program with efficiencies and a lot of the time and effort looking at policies, procedures, and actually spend more time on double checking that and actually making quality improvement, that's really what we want. We want every program to be able to advance, and we're just hoping that this is one tool. But once again, just emphasizing the human component of oversight. You need to be you need to have somebody actively invested in the program using this tool, because the responses, if it comes out something doesn't make sense, it may be because of the prompt or the source document, but only somebody that's really in the program is going to understand that. So we're just really thankful to disseminate this, and we're hopeful that programs can use this effectively, and then hopefully down the road, whether through ACAPT or JOPT, just other avenues to be able to share how to use this as well.
And also, we just want to acknowledge our two co-authors who aren't here today with us, Michael Brown and Doug Holliday as well. It was a really strong collaboration to get this paper written.
Exactly. And I'm excited to see what else you can do in the future.
Thank you so much. Really
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Derek.